Today is a great privilege to enjoy having a short chat with Craig Cutris. Craig has been the city manager at Red Deer for many years, and I think in more than one occasion, which you can perhaps fill us in on as we go through it. But your life, which eventually led to Red Deer, was not a straightforward set of steps, as I understand. You start off in, I believe, South Africa?
Well, I was born in London, England, and then my parents immigrated in the 50s, and I did to South Africa.
Right.
And we lived all over South Africa, different cities, and then I did my architectural degree and my master's in Cape Town, in fact, at the University of Cape Town. And then I had a job as a planner, forward planning in Port Elizabeth, which is east of Cape Town. And from there, I immigrated to Canada because things were looking really very, very bleak at that time in South Africa. And I've been in many protests, and it was not looking good. So we left, and we moved to Canada. And then, of course, I had to find a job. So essentially, I arrived in Toronto with only a few $1,000s, stayed with friends that I knew, and another friend who was in Calgary indicated there was a job in Red Deer. So I applied for that, and they flew me out, and that was the first job offer I had.
What did your family come with you, or did you come to Canada alone?
My former wife and I, we came out in 1980, and she went back.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you ended up in this province of Alberta and the city of Red Deer looking for a planner?
They were looking for a planner, correct. There was a big shortage of planners at that time. And I was lucky enough to work for the Red Deer Regional Planning Commission at a time when they had a whole range of projects all ready to go.
I guess historically I can't resist asking, did you succeed, or did you know Cole, Commissioner Cole, Dennis Cole?
Not at the time. I met him afterwards because he used to come to visit from time to time. But my main contact in the city was initially with Bob Cundy from the Red Deer Regional Planning Commission, the longtime director there. And then my mentor really in the city, and the guy I admired a lot during his career here, was Mike Day.
Yes, I knew them all. Actually, I was away from Red Deer for a number of years too. Seems to have that draw factor to it, and then stay factor. My father and Dennis Cole were close friends, and Dennis, I think, was the commissioner here for many years. But that aside, what were some of the challenges you faced or you saw, or were given to you when you arrived as the planner, and how did your planning relate to the city? Because they were separate organizations.
Well, it was the Red Deer Regional Planning Commission at that time, and they were contracted by the city to do the city's planning. And essentially, we had 2 planners and 2 assistants allocated to do city work. And because of my urban design work and qualifications, I was given right off the first major project, the Waskesiu Park. And really? I was given that job in 1980, and it went from there because that job just grew and grew. And then I saw the park right from the initial plan that I did with the committee right through to its final steps.
Maybe I will go back a step, as I'm looking forward to meeting Don Moore.
Yes.
Who was intimately involved with it, of course. But had the planning, the Waskesiu Park planning approvals and funding and so on already gone through?
No, they were announced almost exactly when I arrived. The Red Deer Regional Planning Commission had done a very, very quick sketch of what things might look like. And there was a very innovative number of people at the province within the Lougheed government who really had this belief in parks. And so they announced in 1980 investing money from the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund to 5 urban parks at cities in Alberta, and Red Deer and Lethbridge and Lloydminster and and Grand Prairie were the main cities that got this money to do the urban park. And each step had to be approved by the province, including the master plan. But it was a very, very good relationship between the province and the city.
Well, I didn't realize there were several other communities, particularly Medicine Hat and Lethbridge as well.
Yes.
Yeah. It seems rather fair in a way, but were they all the same size, the same magnitude, and did they have the same impact?
No, they were very, very different. I think that we had a tremendous advantage because we had this incredible resource of the river valley, and we had two big pockets of land that we could acquire reasonably easily. The one was the Gates Lakes, which was a federal bird sanctuary, and the other was the whole Heritage Ranch, which was owned by the province, the land, the old Hoopfer property, and we were able to get these two big anchors of land in place as we grew the park around them.
Oh, really? The sanctuary, of course, goes back to about the 1920s as a separate entity.
That's right.
It certainly, for many years, was a community focus for recreation, walks through the park and so on, strongly supported by our next door neighbor, a chap named McCary Wood.
Right.
And he would often do his broadcasts from down there as frequently as he did in his backyard at home for the many years that he contributed to the environmental issue and talked about it from a personal point of view.
And he and his wife were actually involved in the final planning, and he was at the opening of the Kerrywood Nature Center when we actually opened it 3-4 years later.
So that was part of was that part of the program, or was that already in place?
The Kerrywood Nature Center?
Right.
It was part of the plan. In fact, we had to purchase that property on which the Kerrywood Nature Center sits because that was subject to development. And so we had this whole piece of land between the sanctuary itself and the river, which was in private ownership.
And that's the McCullough family then?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. The center, you're quite right, the family were very proud of it and its focus. Although I can't resist my father's comment saying Kerrywood would have rather had the whole of Red Deer as a sanctuary rather than the focus which we have had and continue to have, and enjoy the walkthroughs and having nature right within the city. Okay, were there some other challenges, or was that the main one that became your focus when you arrived?
That became my focus. For a couple of years, it was a major item, but of course there were rezonings and ordinary planning things, and then we shifted to the railway relocation and the whole exercise of moving the railway yards out of the downtown, and then ultimately there were two steps after that, which I was involved in, and that is, first of all, the railway yards over to the highway. Then the next step was moving the yards, because the buildings were all contaminated and very old, over to 3 Mile Bend. And then we were able to open up that whole area really fairly recently as Capstone.
It's interesting that Red Deer's had these opportunities. Not every community has such space that it can look to developing a future plan for right in the middle of the downtown.
Yes, the Capstone was the last project, and of course, unfortunately, what happened is we were preparing Capstone for development just as the economy tanked. But we were seeing, I think, a lot of interest.
2008?
Yes, well, 2019 was when Capstone was opened.
There aren't too many communities in Canada that have either found the funding or had the initiative to move the rail lines right out of their downtown. I guess I'm always reminded of the Canadian preoccupation with the railways when an American speaker came up to give a presentation in Toronto and said, well, the United States follows the lead of General Motors. There's something unusual about Canada, whose national dream is a railway. taking after the book, of course, by Pierre Burton. But that was a major opportunity for the city.
It was both an opportunity and a necessity in some ways, because CP Rail was on side because there'd been the accident in Mississauga. And so with the accident in Mississauga and the need to really, for safety measures, create a distance from the yards, they provided a significant portion of the funding.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I had a small, relationship with it in trying to preserve the CPR bridge.
Yeah.
Which was planned for demolition. And two things came out of that struck me, back to your points. The first was that the city, particularly the council, were willing to entertain a proposition to keep it. And the other was the possibility that the path system could be extended past the new CPR line and potentially beyond that, which would require county or eventually county support for it. But I was delighted that the body, particularly the council, were open to those discussions, and eventually we were successful.
There was a lot of underground discussion on that. Not everybody really wanted to keep the bridge, but sure. The interesting thing was in the agreement, in the master agreement for railway relocation, of course everything was costed out, and CP Rail had some money set aside to demolish the bridge. So the deal was, you give us that money, we'll take the bridge. And that's what happened.
Not a bad deal.
No, that was good.
Anyway, of course that's unfurling, and the CPR bridge has become a significant part of the path system in the city. We've all gone across it many times. I think there was even a wedding on it.
There've been several dinners.
I've missed those, I guess.
Yeah, they block off the bridge and have it as a big entertainment complex, and perhaps that'll start happening again now in the post-COVID.
Okay, that's the rail relocation. Am I right? Am I recalling that it was about $75 million cost?
I think that's about right. I can't remember the details of the budget. They were.
It was
significant.
It was a significant amount of money, but a great opportunity. Where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity for the city.
We could also get rid of the 445th Street Bridge, which had to be rebuilt if we hadn't relocated, and it allowed us, of course, to push Ross Street through.
Yes, and I think you were front and center of the issue of preserving the CPR station.
That's correct, and that was another challenge because the engineers didn't see that my way, and so we had I won't say friction, but we had quite serious disagreement between the engineers who had the road going straight through the railway station, and Michael Dorr and myself, and to some degree Mike Day, who was hovering on the fence on this issue at the time, we said to the engineers, isn't there a way you can curve it round it? Well, the only way we could curve it round it was actually to create a one-way system. And so then what became known as the couplet was 49th and Ross, and then we were able to swing Ross round to the west and to do it that way.
That's kind of reminding me of that surprising innovation, at least we thought it was, when Dennis Cole came in and did the one-way designation of Gates versus 49th, and then, of course, leading eventually to the bridge. But that's been, stood the test of time now for well over 50 years and been a significant improvement in passenger flow and vehicle flow. But it's made Red Deer a one-way town, too.
Yeah, well, there are compromises each way. But I think keeping the station and the cenotaph in that vista down Ross Street was really important. And of course, then there were the moves to move the cenotaph a long time plan to move it to the center of City Hall Park. And there was our Heritage Preservation Committee, which Larry Pym headed off, Councillor Larry Pym. We strongly resisted moving the cenotaph, and eventually in a split vote, council decided to keep it exactly where it was, and then we built the Ross Street patio around it.
I think those have both been significant and very positive additions to the downtown. And I must say I'm historically delighted that the cenotaph hasn't moved. All the pictures, of course, relate to where it is now.
Yeah.
Lord Byng, I think it was, that unveiled it. And
that's right.
All
those pictures.
The history, even, I guess from a local point of view, goes back to Vimy Ridge, which he was the supreme commander over the Vimy battle. But anyway, that's history. Are there some other major challenges that you faced the first time you were
the first time
as community manager?
Well, then I moved on as director of community services, and in that role, I was involved in the Door Center and school planning and in social planning. So I had park social planning and aspects of engineering under the community services banner, all the recreation programs, and we were able to do a number of interesting things with that as well. And of course, it was fairly recent that we'd built the Door Center at that time, but later on we have done 2 expansions to that since.
To the Door Center?
Yes. And I did the planning, but in my first iteration in Red Deer, before I moved out east for a number of years, was the overall plan for the Collicutt Center with the 2 high schools. But it didn't quite materialize as I really wanted it. What I had hoped was we would have 2 high schools linked to the recreation center in the same way as this door, into one kind of curved complex with the field.
Wouldn't that have been marvelous?
That was the concept.
Yeah.
But at that time, the Catholic School Board would not cooperate. The public school board was a bit leery, and then it went ahead as 3 separate developments.
Let me just backtrack to the Daw Center, because of course it's undergoing a very major expansion right now. But how unique is that combination, I guess, of public and private, public and separate schools? I think Rocky or some other centers have followed that precedent, but is that a precedent in the province?
And it was a precedent at the time, I believe, and Don Moore, who you'll speak to, he can probably tell you a lot of the history of that cooperation that happened at that time and the board that we had to run it. And it was very disappointing to me that we couldn't continue that partnership when we moved on to the high school site. But there's since been a kind of ruling from the Catholic Church that they didn't want the facilities linked. And so that was a directive to our school board, I believe.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
I think it's something that should be revisited, because I believe that we should be able to link these facilities, share libraries. It would be so great to have one big library for the schools and for the public there. And the other thing they did was they cut out the public library there in the plan, making it 2 school libraries.
Yeah, I suppose it helps book sales, but more libraries to sell to, but not the issue.
Smaller libraries.
The libraries have changed so much.
Yeah.
With the advent of electronic access, and you can almost move a library to wherever now. It doesn't have to be supported by hard copy books. But that's, I guess, a separate topic. How many years were you here then before you left?
I was here about 15 years, 13 years before I left to go to Owen Sound. I was there for 12 years, and then I returned in 2007 as city manager. And
you were city manager until
2019. 2019. My last day was the closing of the Canada Winter Games.
Oh, how exciting.
Well, I timed it that way.
Oh, well, when you left Red Deer, you went to Owen Sound in Ontario,
Yes,
as I
that's
recall.
right.
And you were, I remember meeting somebody from Owen Sound and said, oh, you're very fortunate. You've managed to capture our Director of Community Services, Craig Cutris, as your town manager. And he's very sensitive to architectural, preservation of architectural structures and so on. And you have a very old and noteworthy city. So how was your time in Owen Sound?
My time in Owen Sound was really, really good. The difficulty was the economy in that portion of Ontario was not that good. But on the other hand, there were factors that meant that they hadn't demolished all the historic buildings. So it has this fantastic resource of really old buildings, one of which we owned, the former mayor's house there. And it was an exciting time because we did a major downtown plan in which all the services under the main street, a lot of them were even wood. There were still wooden water pipes.
Well, Owen Sound is that old.
And so we dug up the whole main street, but at the same time we had to do a marketing campaign to keep the stores alive. And what we did was we made it much better with new lights and historic features, interpretive signage. We really recreated the downtown in a different form, and that was a very exciting project. But other things that stand out is they had an old Carnegie library, and the ceiling was all decorative, but we went up into the ceiling, or I didn't, but others did, and it was all about to fall down. And so they said, oh, we'll just take it out, and we'll put a suspended ceiling in there. I said, no, that's the whole feature of this building. And so the city allocated fairly significant funds to put in new metal struts and then replaster all the decorative ceiling in there. And the same thing happened with the mausoleum. They had an old mausoleum with fantastic marble decorations and Tiffany glass. And it had been decided before I arrived that this building just had to be shuttered because it would be too expensive to renovate and the windows couldn't be fixed. Well, we found a manufacturer in Toronto that could, at a reasonable price, fix the windows, and a local mason who could fix up the marble. And so they have now this mausoleum in which some of the older families are, and you can go and visit it and learn about its history. And that sort of saved that building, and that was, I didn't lead that, but I enabled it.
I haven't heard that kind of a story in a Canadian city for quite a while. But you're reminding me, one of my side interests is in the chap who helped charter the Rotary Club in Red Deer, which reaches 100 next year. And he was in ill health, so he moved from Calgary to Vancouver. And when he passed away, he was buried in the mausoleum. And I hadn't put that connection together. The other thing I remember about this side story is that when the next circus came to Vancouver, they shut it down a half an hour early. One of his side interests was attending circuses anywhere within 100 miles of Calgary, and became very befriended all of the performers. And so when they came to Vancouver, they shut down the circus and had a spontaneous parade up to pay their respects to him at the mausoleum. But that's not a very common Canadian tradition.
No.
And you would have to have a venerable institution to even have families willing to. Anyway, the years at Owen Sound passed, and then you had an opportunity to return to Red Deer.
Yes, I heard that the council had changed over, and they were, of course, looking for a new city manager. And
as Mike Day had retired.
Well, Norbert had come in between, and so a number of people phoned me and say, "Hey, it's up again, please come back." And so I thought about that, and I really did want to come back. And I done a number of projects there, and the larger city, and the opportunities here with a great economy at that time struck me as that I could really do a lot here. So I loved the city, of course. Having been invested in the park system, to come back to that was also an incentive. So moved back.
And that would be in
2007.
Okay. And you were, of course, here for another 12 years. Tell us about, I guess, the time between and the challenges you faced in particular when you arrived back.
Well, I think the first thing was really to develop a strategic plan. There had been a strategic plan, but it hadn't been very well linked with the budget. And we had quite a few budget challenges, and what projects should proceed and what shouldn't, and all that sort of thing. But I think during the term, we were able to create a number of good partnerships with the school board and do additions, for example, to schools to make them even more accessible to the public. And Don Moore actually really piloted the agreement with the school boards because he had this great relationship with the school boards. They drafted an agreement of cooperation so the school boards could access our facilities with their programs and we could access theirs. And so the idea of a community addition to schools was one our council looked upon favorably. So when Timberstone came along, we added the Timberstone Library, branch library. When along came the West Park School, we added a community addition. But my big disappointment was not being able to, I'd convinced the public school board that we should have our Southeast Library in conjunction with the West Park School. And the school board was all on side, and the library board and the city council had allocated the budget, and the library board was in the midst of a strategic plan and wouldn't commit to another branch. So city council allocated the money elsewhere, and that proposal went away.
And from I guess, a logic point of view, it seems so obvious to integrate them. I mean, school's going to have a library. You'd already done the Daw Center.
Yeah, the Daw Center and Timberstone.
And
Timberlands, sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, I won't say unfortunate, but for those of us who enjoy libraries and reading, that's a disappointment.
I think there'll be
one-stop shop.
I think there'll be another opportunity when the next school comes along, because I think the focus of the library board, they went into the mall in order to have a presence on the southeast, and I think that's needed. And again, the Collicutt should have had a public library component to it. So you win some and you lose some. But on the overall, I think the city's done pretty well, and the partnership between the school boards has really been good.
Okay. I know you had a financial challenge over the Collicutt Center. Because the budgets or costs were starting to go up, and you can't always predict what will happen.
Well, actually, I didn't have that financial challenge because that was built. I did the overall plan of the site, and the facility was built while I was out east.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't have that challenge one way or another.
It was there to enjoy.
I've had many financial challenges. That wasn't one of them. I did. We had a few financial challenges in the North Red Deer facility, now the YMCA, but which serves the North. But it was built and it's working very well.
Okay. What another challenge, I guess, is in perpetuity because of it, is with the local county, which of course surrounds Red Deer, and as Red Deer expands, it has to expand into county property. So that requires a degree of, I guess, I won't say cooperation, but timing and agreement, and particularly when it comes to providing services and so on to county areas, which then have come out of the city. But that has had its ups and downs. Let me just, I guess, ask to get reminded, who was the mayor when you came back?
Morris Frueling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so actually I came back in 2 stages.
Oh, really?
I was flown in for the negotiations with regard to the intermunicipal plan that was trying to deal with the growth around the city's fringe. And we developed a plan, and the plan was done just as I arrived, but we had negotiation sessions, which I flew in for. And the plan was derived around the principle that we would not apply for annexation of Gasoline Alley if we could annex the other areas which the county had frozen us out of. Where Queens Industrial Park, we had an application to annex that, which the county had opposed, and so we were landlocked. And at that time, the city had sold off all of Edgar Industrial Park, industrial lands, at very little cost. They'd sort of given a fire sale. Initially, you would only sell if they were going to develop immediately. But they sold off all that land, not predicting this boom. So the answer to the boom was to build Queens Industrial Park. The county opposed that.
Opposite the,
right.
West of the highway.
So the deal in 2007 was that we'd leave Gasoline Alley alone, and we would then be able to do Queens. But it was a little too late. And meanwhile, Melcor built the industrial area on our border to the southeast. And that would never, I don't think that would have ever happened if we'd been able to get the Queens in the time frame it was proposed.
Sorry, where's the Melcor?
The Melcor
division?
is, it's immediately southeast, south of the Westerner to the east.
And that's Gasoline Alley?
No, it's to the east, on the other side of the highway, to the east of Gasoline Alley.
Ah, okay.
North of Mackenzie Drive.
Right,
yeah,
right. Why was the county so reluctant or resistant to allowing the city to expand? That surprised me because you can predict that it would have been known for many years.
Well, I think that this is a common fight across the province. There is no proper planning legislation which defines what you can and cannot do. There are some provinces that have greater restrictions on only expanding, or in favor of only expanding if there's a plan, etc. But Ralph Klein threw out regional planning when he was premier. And so there was no regional plan that defined what we could and couldn't do. And so the county just didn't want to lose its tax base. And then there was an argument under the former manager about who could use our waste management site. So there was a regular, I don't think one can entirely blame the county. It was just friction between the two resulted in nothing happening. But the agreement did resolve that in fair measure.
I guess from a county resident, having moved there from the city, one senses the differences in utilities and or access to them. And I can remember when the fire hall was built by the county right on the corner of the city, and there was no planning for it. It just happened based on the county's desire or wishes, and nothing, with no discussions with the city. And I thought, we should that shouldn't be happening. I think for those of us who might require one fire hall or another, gosh, place them in appropriate places, because amongst other things, it affects your rates.
Well, strictly speaking, Gasoline Alley should be receiving the kind of fire service that the city does. But there's only an emergency protocol because they only have a volunteer force.
And that's still in place?
Yes.
Yeah. And yet your fire hall is probably closer to them than theirs.
Not closer, but it's there with a full service.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, when you look in retrospect, we have this integrated fire service, and the province has been kind of bashing at that for a while now, and this is one of the reasons I'm running for the election now.
Is there anything else you want to comment on about your time as city manager and some of the problems that you weren't able to resolve?
Well, let's talk about what I resolved. Not me, but the community. And that is the fact that we had this opportunity to host the Canada Winter Games. And back in my first term as Director of Community Services, Don Moore and others, Lowell Hodgson, etc., they put in the bid for the games at that time. And we all worked on the bid, and you know, we had the mascot, Mickey the Beaver, and everything was going fairly well. And then we were not awarded the games. They went to Jasper. So Jasper and other communities. So the
what year would that be?
It would be around 1986, around there, anyway. So it's cyclical, you know, it comes to the province on a cyclical basis, and the next one we had the opportunity for was 2019. But of course the bids are 45 years before. So right in my slot as city manager, I had the opportunity of working with Lynn Radford and others and her committee, and really putting together, or the group put together, with Shelley Gagnon, who was our recreation person, this amazing bid for the Canada Winter Games, and we won. We got the bid. And so this, I think, was the, well, it was the major achievement of the city during the time I was city manager, because council was right behind the bid, and the college was right behind the bid, and the school boards were right behind the bid, and we were able to do some quite amazing stuff. I mean, there were huge private sector contributions. Gary W. Harris contributed to the Gary W. Harris Center. The Donalds contributed to the building, the medical building that's attached. And Gary W. Harris, he also contributed to the square outside the old elementary school building, which we protected and became a cultural center as part of the Games. And it became the Games headquarters, and we renovated that building as part of it. So there's a great amount of infrastructure that we were able to put in that is great for the future, and that was all out of the Games, apart from the $100 million economic benefit in the year that the Games came to Red Deer.
I'm reminded of the 1988 World Winter Olympics in Calgary, and the financial results from it that have been so important and still are, because they were so substantial. And more particularly, the volunteer system that they set up. Was that a model, or did that influence, or were there any Red Deer people who participated in that and took away from it some of those almost one-of-a-kind examples in the history of the Olympics?
I think that that there were a number of lessons from the Olympics, and a lot of people from Red Deer went down and volunteered there. The community spirit that you could get from the Games, and people remembered that, and I think that influenced our council to be really right behind the Games. The other thing was that at the Glenbow, they made some fairly significant mistakes in terms of the Indigenous exhibit, in terms of the support of the Indigenous community, which resulted in a number of protests. And I think that that was something that we consulted with the Indigenous community and made sure that we didn't make any mistakes in that area.
That problem was down in Calgary that
yes,
you'd seen or realized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Calgary came away with, from that event, with a huge volunteer base. I presume I won't say it vanishes with time, but if you don't use it, you lose it. But when I was looking at the story about the 2019 games, I think one of the figures that I was reminded of was the 5,500 volunteers who participated in it. A huge number for a town of 100,000 plus or minus. But it also told me that, you know, not only was there a spirit, there was a willingness, there was leadership, there was teamwork. And as I recall, I just remember the excitement of, I think we had a Rotary meeting. We got moved for one or two of our meetings for that week. How proud some of the people in the club were about their opportunity to participate and be a part of and be excited by. So it just isn't, I mean, it always bothers me that these events get reflected more in terms of money. How much did you bring to the community or something, as opposed to what facilities did they help establish, build, renovate, create that can be used down the way.
Yeah, I think that really the volunteer base couldn't have been better. It was just amazing. And Lynn Radford, who coordinated, so really you had the host committee, which was coordinating the volunteers and the work, and they had their own staff and they worked on everything related to the games, and they were really the true leaders of the games, working with the city, which was the recreation staff and Shelley Gagnon. And then, of course, the part that I had to do was sell the various pieces of the budget and push from the city side and coordinate the facility development that was done. As well as particularly, my biggest push personally was for the headquarters to be in the old elementary school building so that we could do something with that, because it was offered to us for $1, but of course nobody wanted to pay for its renovation. And then we said, hey, here's a purpose. It's the headquarters of the games, and after that it can be our lacking cultural center. And so that's how that happened.
I have some fondness for that building as I took my 7, 8, and 9 grade school training in it. And one thing I do remember was in 1955, which was Alberta's centennial, we put on a special program in the arena that involved the kids and whatever, but we also had a tree planting ceremony in precisely the place that you renovated in front of dedicated to Joe Welch, who was the principal at the time, and after whom the school has been named. The things you remember, and you know, I could talk about the teachers too, but those experiences, you know, live a lifetime. So that happened, and as I said, there was so much excitement and enthusiasm in the town. It's always nice to see and feel and be a part of. Well, that wasn't your last project. You were involved with one just, you know, to create more space for the city in terms of building the high-rise just southeast of City Hall. Well, there had to be a lot of planning for that during your time as well.
Do you mean the courthouse?
I do.
Yeah, we had that site, and the province was basically vacillating on whether to give us money for that. So we did the lobbying for that, and then ultimately they couldn't basically keep the court going and build on the existing site. And the stupidity of the building of the original courthouse, which was in my first term at the city, was that they built it so that it couldn't be made higher. The foundations only supported the 2-story building. So we said, okay, we've got this piece of land over here, and we've got the parkade next door. Now, province, it's over to you. You can buy that site from us at market value, and you can build it there. But we want to see the old Parsons house kept. And there's still, that we were at the edge of an agreement with the NDP government on the Parsons House, and I haven't heard yet how that's resolved. At least they're built around it, but what's going to happen with that, I don't know. And the other thing with the province that we were negotiating on is buying the land where the J.J. Gates House is. And so that will come into city ownership.
Center.
Yeah. So the piece along the sanctuary, I propose that be incorporated in the sanctuary lands and that we renovate the J.J. Gates House. But that hasn't, I don't know how the negotiations are with that. You know, when you're out of the loop, you're really out of the loop because there's stuff that's discussed that's all confidential. But at least the courthouse is going ahead, unlike the hospital. And, you know, we've made progress at least on that.
I guess just from a spectator's point of view, that courthouse building seems so high when you compare it with the existing, was it two-story courthouse? I don't know how many it's eventually going to be, but it seems to be like 3 times as large as the current one.
Well, if you talk to Jim Foster, he will tell you how disastrously small they built the other one, and that he'd been lobbying for 10 years for one the size that they are building now. Of course, there is room for growth, but you don't put up something like that and then not allow an extra story for expansion. You're building that for 20 years.
I'd like to think that there's at least that much planning into it. It reminds me of the old hospital and the psych floor in it that was empty for so many years, many years.
Yes.
But that's necessary planning, certainly if the city continues to grow anywhere near the rate at which it has.
Of course, the hospital should have been expanded at the same time. And that's when our lobbying efforts, they only gave us the courthouse, not the hospital, but we had 2 major needs we were lobbying to the government for, and they were the hospital expansion, cardiac catheter lab, and the courthouse.
Well, I mean, that said, is not, from a provincial point of view, it's not inexpensive, especially the hospital. Well, the figure I've heard is 1.8 billion, which of course inflation will influence. But is that designed to build an addition, or is it a new hospital?
No, it's an addition, but exactly how the addition is being planned, talking to HS is not shall we say, very forthcoming.
You hinted that the starting date hasn't even been set.
Correct.
Who knows how it fits into their capital plans, but having worked in the hospital field for so many years, 2 things have always struck me. One is how inexpensive the capital costs are compared to the operating costs down the way.
Right.
And once you've built it, it depreciates it, but the operating budget goes the other way.
But the difficulty is we're so underfunded in relation to other communities. And the whole thing is, I don't know if you go to emergency or been to emergency recently, but sometimes there are 5 or 6 ambulances there. And the reason is that the ambulances come, but they have to stay with the patient until they're admitted. Mm. So you've got 5 ambulances off the system. And that's why we're getting all these red alerts saying no ambulance available. It's because they're all stuck there because there's no staff to take the people in.
You know, I've always been surprised because the ambulances are fairly well staffed.
Yes.
And I mean, I shouldn't, I guess, facetiously say this, but the occupants are always having coffee, waiting for something to happen, either to take the individual back or, you know, to leave because the patient got admitted. But admissions can take days.
No, they have to be able to, there's a process of handing it over to the system. And they don't wait days, but they do wait 6 or 7 hours sometimes. But that is totally unacceptable, just totally, because it means that the equipment and the manpower is just not available for emergencies. I mean, the ambulance service fell under me as city manager, and they took over, first of all, the contracts and wouldn't give us the ambulance we needed. And then secondly, they moved the dispatch so that we no longer have integrated dispatch with police, which was the original integrated dispatch center we had here. And they've centralized it all. And then there's a second step to call police, which is just not a good idea.
I'm surprised at that one. I mean, it's been flagged and one sees periodic comments about it, but it hasn't been resolved.
It has not been resolved.
And that has to be a province-wide issue.
Well, as far as the integrated, the three centers that they amalgamated, because some had been amalgamated already, but the 3 or 4 that objected were Calgary, Fort McMurray, Red Deer, and Lethbridge, representing a population of about 1.67 million. Yeah. And they went and they faced the Premier off. 2 of them said they'd pay for the dispatch themselves, and including Red Deer. And the province wouldn't budge because AHS said they wanted that to happen and they were going to do it willy-nilly. And that was a very bad move.
Oh dear. And the taxpayer pays the...
Well, the taxpayer pays, but it's the people who don't get service that suffer.
From the lack of manpower or having it tied up. When you retired, what was your plan? You're young and healthy and experienced and competent, and you want to stay in central Alberta. How do you put all that together?
Well, you know, when you leave the city, or decide to leave the city, and you want to get your pension, you retire, right? So I didn't retire. I left the city on retirement, if you like. So I had every intention of doing other stuff. I love my work, and there's various aspects of work that I still wanted to do. So initially I got offered to go up to Caroline and solve some of their amalgamation problems with the County of Clearwater. And I worked for them for 2 years, and I believe I brought it to a point where that amalgamation is about to happen. And someone else very competent has been brought in to handle that for the final stages. So I got along really well with the council there, and it was a good 2 years, part-time, but 2 to 3 days a week. And so I did that, and then I did some other minor consulting work, worked on the Golden Circle board. And then what I had in my mind all the time was potentially running, and I ran for council. It was a late decision because I'd already put my name in to be MLA, but I wasn't sure I'd be approved because I hadn't been a long-term NDP member. So I ran for council, last-minute entry, and the far right decided they'd do some targets on me because of the restrictions on COVID and so on. I think they did a pretty good job. I fell just off the mark. I got over 4,000 votes, but I didn't get the 4,500 needed to be in the top tier. So I then found out, my application had been in with the NDP because I see them as being the only sane alternative right now, and I generally agree with almost all their policies. And so I was then approved. So then I was able to announce, and I did, and I'm currently running for the nomination, which is the October the 5th vote. But I have some fairly sturdy competition.
How's it going?
Well, I'm not going to predict. I'd say it's about 50-50 in terms of supporters right now, so we'll see. It's I found it quite difficult because it's not as if I'm kind of standing for election and here's my platform, as it was with the city. It's how many members you get to buy. and you can be 14. So there are a lot of high school students that have actually, there is a certain degree of, perhaps wanting a younger candidate, who knows? But anyway, I don't think I'm getting many of the high school supporters, because my competition is actually has been involved in the school systems. But I've got a lot of support.
Do they vote? Do they get to vote?
Yeah, that's right.
Really?
So it's a membership contest right now, and I'm hoping to carry it off and then stand against Adriana LaGrange.
And revisit the curriculum.
The revisit of the curriculum is guaranteed if the NDP get in, but if they don't get in, I believe they'll just push it through, right through.
Yeah.
I've met with some curriculum experts in order to try and get a handle on some of the things are really terrible, like trying to introduce all the grades at once instead of running through the system with the grades, starting at grade 1 and moving up. They're trying to push the system on all grades, K-6. And the Aboriginal content is lacking, the diversity content is lacking, the sexual education content and diversity is lacking. These are real big weaknesses in the curriculum as drafted. And I believe one of the drafters, I don't know his name, actually is an apologist for the residential school system, so it wasn't likely to produce a great result. He was from the Premier's staff.
Yeah, well, I can advertise my book again. On the new one on pathways to education in Red Deer, but the first chapter is on the residential school here, which Don Hepburn wrote, and wrote very nicely and knowledgeably. But when I looked at it as a published chapter, I thought, and I learned quite quickly that he'd actually had initiated what's called Remembering the Children program in society through the United Church. And the recognition program that they came up with for recognizing the children who had passed away has received national recognition as a precedent, as a model. And it struck me that was because Don, although he received an honorary degree from the United Church, had passed away. And I thought it was a local precedent with national implications that was well worth noting as an attachment to his chapter. And so, unfortunately, Don's not around to do that. But what struck me is that when I went looking for grants, the first question was, are you politically correct? What have you done to validate what you've written? How sensitive are you, or have you been to all points? And so I pointed out the things that I had done locally and how the community here had got together, created a resolution, a partnership with all the schools and all the reserves that had sent children here, and developed a recognition ceremony which had received such widespread recognition. So I thought it was just another precedent that came out of Red Deer. It was well worth sharing.
Well, I was talking to Lyle Kewatin Richards the other day, and of course everybody is pleased that we have in fact purchased, or the province has purchased, the site.
Right.
Yeah.
Where the cemetery was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't wish to be polarized to one side or another, but I certainly am very familiar with some of the challenges of treating infectious diseases in groups within Canada. I've latterly been associated with researching the problem of addressing the TB epidemic amongst the Eskimos in the north, and hepatitis B, the same problem. When you all live in an igloo, you pass on disease a little more readily than the rest of the community. But anyway, that's an aside. But is there anything else in that you'd like to comment on, or that we may not have covered or included?
Well, perhaps the biggest project, apart from the games, was the moving of the yards. And I've always had to be a little bit of an apologist for that, because moving the yards was absolutely essential, because the buildings were done. So you either rebuilt where it was, a whole bunch of yards and stockpiles right next to the downtown, or you found a new site, which we did at 3 Mile Bend. So we built the building, and we added a number of features that made it meet the LEED standard of environmental suitability, including some towers, which are for ventilation, etc. So they've met a lot of the green standards and is cheaper to operate. So basically they are butler buildings, which is a sort of prefab building, but they have a fairly attractive facade. Anyway, in the election, or the previous election, I think it would be 2 elections ago, so it would be about 8 years from now, 2011, I think, the election became a major election issue, was that we'd overbuilt the civic yards, and a group ran for council calling it the Taj Mahal. And so we had that media storm over that, and I think when anybody looks at those buildings now, they think, oh, they're really fairly basic. But at that time, because they looked nice, they couldn't be civic yards, right? I mean, civic yards have to be ugly. So I'm very proud of the fact that we built something which was not only environmentally sound, but was there to last, not just slapped up the cheapest building we possibly could. But it did cause a bit of a storm for Morris when he was mayor, and it was overcome because a lot of the people that called it the Taj Mahal didn't win elections, so it never became an ongoing problem.
Just a side issue, is it high enough above the river that it won't get flooded?
Well, with climate change these days, you never know. It certainly is well above the river floodway, well above the river floodway, as projected, and even a lot of additional protection since then. But I think these days we're beginning to recognize that the things that we thought were sound, environmentally we thought were pretty much could be relied upon. You know, even the impact of the Dixon Dam or whatever. What we knew, we don't know anymore. We have to completely revise our thoughts. And I don't think I know that our provincial government just hasn't got its head around where it stands on climate change. It's just all over the place. I mean, it's not done nothing, but it just doesn't have a plan. There are so many things it should be doing.
It's defensive or rejects the Liberal plan.
Well, it sticks with oil and gas isn't going away, but probably there are opportunities from from other types of technologies such as hydrogen, etc., that we could make because of our abundance of natural gas. There are much more we could do in terms of other forms of green energy with windmills and with photovoltaic cells. We could really do a lot more than we're doing. And I think that if the government changes, even if it remains with the same leaders, they have to address this with urgency, and it hasn't been.
No, well, I think when the previous NDP government, they worked out a plan to move the province away from using coal to produce energy, and I thought that was overdue in this province because we'd relied so heavily on it, and have such a great base of oil and gas.
Well, I think they've
basically energy services.
They've basically closed the coal down. But right. Then there's this issue of the eastern slopes. They suddenly changed the policy and had a number of coal leases on the eastern slopes. And then they got into trouble with that with the community. So they said, no, we're not going to do that, but they've left the leases in place.
No, I didn't know where that was at, but...
It's in limbo.
Okay.
The government defeated the bill to protect the slopes.
Well, as we look forward, and you've obviously made some basic decisions on that issue, but as to who should be looking forward for the province. But is there anything else that you want to add about, in my view, Alberta's has had a major effect on Canada over the years. There's a lot of initiatives that come out of Alberta because there's a lot of energy and good ideas and innovation. And there's an opportunity, whether it's the Calgary Olympics that sets such a precedent for them, or even Red Deer on a smaller scale. There's a lot of leadership potential in this province. Perhaps it's just under-tapped or untapped.
Well, I love the province of Alberta. I mean, I've made it my home and I've returned it to it as my home. And I think, this community has a great deal going for it. When I think about the fact that the country over the next 20 years is going to gain a population of 10 million, and Red Deer is likely to grow by about 46% according to Statistics Canada, then I think we have to plan for that growth. And we also have to put aside some of the issues of, this separation notion. We have to work with the federal government and find the compromises that are needed. We've got into a situation of polarizing. And I think that if we drop some of the polarization and say, we'll work together for the best deal, we'll get a better deal. And I think we have huge innovation in this province. Yeah. And I think that we need to tap into that innovation and forget about our polarization, because I think we have a huge opportunity. We have a diverse population. We've got resources of all kinds. We've got technology that can transfer on to renewable energy. Just huge opportunities.
And we have the energy sources, whichever one you want.
Right, geothermal.
Including wind.
Yeah.
Lots of sun and...
wind, solar, geothermal, hydrogen. We're not going in the right direction.
True. But all that said, Red Deer, the center of it, and having lived in Red Deer for so many years and taken advantage of Calgary and Edmonton as because it's a much smaller community, but a more personalized one. It's really been great fortune. In my own family, they started out in Winnipeg and came to Red Deer as a halfway house to moving to Calgary, and I'm glad it became a permanent home. Allows me to go, know a lot of the people, having grown up with a lot of the original Red Deer people, and Red Deer has brought together and more recently has kept some very significant people, and I hope in this project of Oral Histories that we'll be able to tap into people like Ron McLean and include them as well.
Well, Ron McLean was chair of the games for us, honorary chair, and he did a great job drumming up support. And that was really helpful. So, Ron's wife was actually a student when I taught at the Red Deer College briefly. But there are a couple of people that I'd like to just remember, and the one is Mike Day. He has passed away, of course, but he was a true leader in this community, and he in his quiet way influenced so much. And I don't think he's ever really been given the recognition that he deserves. Don Moore was a huge community builder. And of course, the person that I worked closest with, even in my first iteration, if you like, is Maurice Froehlich. And when he was mayor and I was manager, I felt I had that freedom to create. And that's always what's needed when you're a bureaucrat.
I hope in this project that I can tap into and meet some of those people. I've never met Ron McLean, but if you come across him or you know if he's coming to Red Deer, please let me know.
I'll do that.
I'll try and fit this project in with, because he talks so willingly about Red Deer and his roots. I'd like to include him.
He spent a lot of time here. Yeah.
Well, I think he grew up here. And
he used to, when I was at the Planning Commission, Ron McLean was at the radio station. So whenever he was short of a story, he'd say, "Hey, Craig, what's new at planning today?" And I'd warble on about Waskesiu Park or what our latest trail thing was, and then he'd shove that on the air to fill his gap, right?
Inventive even then. Yeah, he's certainly been one of our most prominent grads.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much,
No.
Craig. It's been as expected, an enjoyable chat, and goes over some of the very major changes that have occurred in our community with your involvement. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to discuss them or talk about them a little bit, because they are so, well, they're all major changes, but they take advantage of a new community that can look and does look to the future.
Well, this has been great. Thanks very much, Bob.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.